Hello again and welcome. I'm Kim Santini, and you're here in my studio with me today. I want to talk about commission work, and specifically, I want to talk about my biggest commission project to date, and that was being the official artist for the 2015 Kentucky Derby. And that was a really sort of delightful, unexpected kind of experience. The project wasn't even on my radar. I did not have any idea how the program worked. I knew a number of peers who had been involved in it or who had been Derby artists in the past, but I felt like that project was just so far beyond anything that I could actually be considered for. And one day, in the midst of a really difficult time in my personal life, I was still in my pajamas at like 11 o'clock, and the kids and I were just being incredibly lazy. And my phone rang, and I picked it up, and this person started talking to me about the Kentucky Derby and artwork, and I really thought it was a prank phone call. And so I wasn't really paying attention to them. I was thinking maybe it was a solicitor of sorts. And then I started hearing them talking about my peers that I knew had been involved in the project. And I said, excuse me a minute, but could you please repeat your name for me? I didn't catch that. And she shared her name again. And I really quickly went to my computer and I Googled her name, and I Googled my friends, and I was like, wow, this is for real. And then I started to actually pay attention. And after the fact, Claire said I was like the most calm and collected Derby artist she'd ever spoken to from the onset. And it really was because I thought she was a prank phone call or a solicitor. But one of the key factors of that story is that every commission project starts with that initial contact. And often that initial contact isn't something we can control. Now, my first one-on-one contact with Claire Jett of Jetstream Productions was via that phone call. But Claire had encountered my work prior to that, which solicited or precipitated that phone call. Claire had, as the licensing agent for multiple events, but in this case, we were working on the Kentucky Derby. She had a very particular concept, and that was a concept that was initially given to her by the board at Churchill Downs, and then she refined that within the scope of her own project and had a very particular look and feel that she wanted for the event. And she knows exactly where that imagery is going to go and how it's going to be used. She just doesn't know, or she has to find someone who's going to create it for her. So she had a very specific set of parameters. And when she began searching for an artist who she felt might be able to deliver a product that would meet those parameters, she sat down at her computer and she did a Google search. So this was in 2014. The internet was 10 years, a decade younger almost than it is now. And she did a Google search for horse racing art. And at the top of her Google search was one of my paintings from a couple of years prior. And it showed up there from my blog. And in 2014, I had been blogging for 7 years. So I had 7 years of daily paintings out there with keyword components and other tags on them to improve their return in a search engine. So that work that I had been doing for prior 7 years in photographing the artwork as I created it, and then tagging it with keywords that were actually relevant to the content, that being horse racing, thoroughbred, racetrack, horse art, horse racing art, thoroughbred racing art, those kinds of keywords that were very specific to the type of artwork that I was creating. Those created that sort of perfect storm where when an interested party sat down and actually began the research for their project, they were able to find my artwork, and then via links in the web, as well as watermarks that were embedded in my artwork, learn who created that artwork and follow it back to my contact info and place that phone call. So if you want to do commission work, I recommend that you have, or you begin to lay the groundwork so that individuals who are interested in your artwork have a means of discovering it, and then also know how to reach out to you to begin that process or have a conversation to begin with. So you really want to have a body of work that represents what you're comfortable doing, what you feel is your greatest strengths or your superpowers as a creative, and you want to showcase that in some fashion so that your audience gets to see it. Now that looks differently for everyone, and niche markets are completely different. But some of the ways that I started out was I started out as a pet portrait artist, and I went to shelters. I got to know rescue groups. I went into locally owned pet stores. I did events with them where I might set my easel up on the sidewalk outside their door on the weekend and paint and speak to customers as they were coming and going. I got involved with my local humane society. So I found a way to connect with people that I thought would be interested in the content of my artwork via extracurricular activities related to my studio. And that's how I kind of recommend everybody else do it. It's a really great grassroots, grounded kind of way to start connecting with people who might want your artwork. And of course, now with the advent of the internet and all these different social media platforms, the opportunity to reach a community beyond the logistical immediate scope of whatever your bubble is where you happen to live is greatly expanded. I think that the most important part of any successful commission project is communication and honesty. So at the very beginning of that phone call, once I got Claire to backtrack and I actually plugged my brain in and started listening to her, I realized, she was telling me what she needed me to deliver. She had very specific things. She wanted a long landscape type painting. She wanted the painting to have a certain feel. She was using particular words over and over again, like pageantry, history, color, excitement, energy. She talked about how it's very important that the artwork can be logistically or geographically placed inside Churchill Downs, the venue that hosts the Derby. She talked specifically about the things of Churchill Downs that the board valued or wanted to see pictured in that artwork. And she also talked about the fact that she was commissioning one singular painting, but from that singular painting, they needed to extract two different passages, one for all the Kentucky Derby materials and the other one for the Kentucky Oaks event, which happens the day prior. So by really listening to what the client wants, that's how you get clues as to what their priorities are, so that you know for a fact that you can deliver artwork that's going to satisfy that. So it's not just a matter of creating a body of work that they like, and then they say, I like your work, here's a photo of whatever, run off and do the portrait, do your thing. It's about having a dialogue. They say they like your work. Fantastic, thank you. Tell me what you like about my work, which was a question that I asked Claire. Why do you think I am the right fit for this job? Because Claire is then proceeded to tell me the connections or the bridges that she felt between the body of work that I had already created and the vision that she had for the piece that I would create. So you want to listen to them and listen to what they are offering you as the context or the parameters of the project. But then you also want to ask them, why do you think I am a right fit? Why am I the right fit for this? And then that allows you to further refine what it is that you're able to bring to the table that they really, really value. So, in the instance of the Kentucky Derby project, with that two focal points or the two passages that they wanted to extract from a singular painting, Claire did say up front in prior years that she had commissioned two separate works, one for the Oaks and one for the Derby, and that pattern had worked in the past. But this year she wanted the two images to be more coherent And she felt that the best way to do that was if they were in the same painting. And I was very honest with her. And I told her up front, I have never done a painting like this before. It's going to be a particular challenge. Let's talk about this some more specifically. Let's figure out collectively what potential solutions might be. And then I'll take those to my drawing board, so to speak, and chew on them some more. So it's okay to share your concerns with the client and let them know, that you have additional questions, or you maybe don't have crystal clarity on some of the things that they're asking you to do. It's really important that you remember any commission is a dialogue. And just because someone comes to you and says, I want you to paint this for me, it doesn't mean you have to say yes. Think about how much time you're going to invest in that project. Saying yes to a commission project means you have to say no to something else. So you want to make certain that when you do say yes, you're saying yes to the things that you really value, that you're going to be proud to add to your portfolio, that you're going to find engaging and challenging to work on, and that maybe are going to teach you or give you something by virtue of the process of going through the project to begin with. The other thing that helps to have established before this conversation even begins is to know exactly what your needs are. Now, of course, in any sort of contractual arrangement, everything is negotiable, but as the provider of something completely unique, it's not like I'm selling a car here and Claire could go get a different or the same make and model from somebody else. I am delivering something completely personal. And as such, I have very specific needs that have to be met in order for this project to go as planned. So some of those things that you should think about and consider, and perhaps even prepare materials about ahead of time. And the biggest one is the purchase price, right? You need to know what your retail cost is for the product that you're creating and putting on the market. So understanding how you're going to develop your price point, whether it's a formula or something else altogether, you need to already have that identified so that when you're speaking to a potential buyer and you're talking about perhaps different sizes or shapes or substrates of a surface to work on, you already have a starting point for cost, for their cost. You already know, and you can speak intelligently about the differences between a 16 by 20, let's say, and an 18 by 24. Okay. So you really want to be able to be familiar with your purchase price and be able to talk about it and calculate what that cost would be while you're having this organic conversation with a potential collector. It also helps to have all of your materials that you're going to use, have them identified already so that you can speak eloquently and clearly about them. So when Claire and I began to talk, I knew I was using some of the best paints on the market, and I had this fabulous custom panel vendor, and I was so excited because they were creating museum quality panels. And right away I told her, oh, this is going to be a great opportunity for me to reach out to this vendor that builds these amazing panels and have them build this museum quality substrate for me to build this painting on. So already I'm speaking to her the value of working with me. And already I'm letting her know that I'm enough of a professional that I have these relationships existing with a support team or with other vendors who can help me supply her the highest quality product in the end. It's also really important to know or have a shipping or delivery process established so that you can speak to the collector, not just about the creation time or the process of the artwork evolving, but how you're going to get that piece into their hands. And depending on the logistics of where they're located, that could be as simple as you delivering it and offering it to hang it on the wall for them, or actually having to hire someone to build a crate for the piece and find a carrier to deliver it. So being familiar with what that cost is going to be for you, and then also how you're going to pass that on to the collector is really important. You also need to know exactly what you need from your client in order to do the project. When I was doing pet portraits, I knew exactly what kind of photos I wanted, what kind of photos created or resulted in the best portraits. And those were non-flash photos taken from the eye level of the animal. Non-flash at the eye level. Those were the two factors. So I was able to communicate that to my collector from the very beginning. If you want me to paint this portrait for you, I need a photo. This is what you need to give me. They non-flash photo taken from eye level of your pet, where your animal makes up at least a third of the picture frame. Okay, so know exactly what you need from the client. Talk about payment terms. Now, in some instances, like with the Kentucky Derby project, they had very specific payment terms, and they were very different than my payment terms when I was working with an individual client. So you have to be flexible or be aware that depending on who you're working with, there may be some latitude in those. But the bottom line is that you do not ever deliver artwork until it has been fully paid for. Don't ever let that custom painting out of your sight until you have been fully paid for your work. That does not mean, with few exceptions, you could accept a check if somebody were picking it up at your home, but you do not ship on spec. You want full payment in the funds transferred into your account before you release that artwork. Otherwise, you have absolutely no recourse. Sadly enough, that's something that we have to be aware of these days. It also helps to clarify usage and rights and permissions with that artwork. So as the creator of the artwork, you own the copyright exclusively. When I created the Kentucky Derby artwork, I owned that copyright. Okay, I could do whatever I wished with that artwork. However, they did build a clause into my contract, which I was aware of, and we spoke very openly about, that they were purchasing the rights to use it in specific instances, and they actually outlined how they were going to use it. And then they said after a period of 12 months after the race, full copyright or the license to use expires, full rights return to the creator. So that was a more complicated situation than any I've ever had with my commission clients. But essentially, they commissioned me to create the painting and they own the painting, but I retain the rights to usage of that image. Now, it's up to you as the creator how you want to utilize that. In some instances, once I get to know my collectors, I realize that they probably wouldn't be cool with me licensing that likeness of their animal for artwork via another vendor. And I will respect that because that's the level of customer service that I deliver. But in other instances, I may have a dialogue with a collector and say, hey, I've been approached by this licensing company. They're looking specifically for golden retriever art. I think the portraiture work that I did for you in the past would be a candidate for this. Technically, I can do it without your permission, but I just want to give you a heads up that I'm considering this option. Usually they're going to respond. I don't think I've ever had anybody respond actually and say, oh my gosh, no, I don't want to be a part of that. Usually they're really excited about the possibility of that, but it's all about how you communicate that. So make sure that and I have a little line in my invoice that says, this transaction is for the purchase of the original painting only. All rights are retained by the artist. That also means that you can use the image for advertising, for marketing. You can publish it in a book or a calendar or something that you create down the road. You can put it on merchandise if you wish. It also means that the owner of that piece cannot replicate it without your permission. And typically what happens is if I have a collector who wants prints of their piece, that's something we talk about during the whole process. Like If I hear they have a child going off to college, I suggest, oh, do you think that your son or daughter might like a small print of this painting to take with them for their dorm room, or, whatever. So you can turn that into an opportunity to offer them either a print that you create yourself or a print at cost through your vendor, if that's something that you're able to do. But begin to have that conversation so that they understand, just like with a professional photographer, you purchase the prints from that photographer. Although now it's not so, now photography rights have sort of, not rights, but processes have sort of changed, and you can also purchase the actual JPEGs and get the prints done on your own. But I think you get the gist of what I'm saying here. Clarify the usage. I have had a couple of collectors come to me and want an image that they could specifically use inside their business. One collector who comes to mind had a pet supply business, and she and her husband were the entrepreneurs behind it. And they wanted permission, or they commissioned a portrait of their dog holding her dinner bowl in her mouth. And they wanted to use that as part of their marketing plan and their signage and their branding for their business. And of course, I was delighted to do that for them. And we just wrote up a very simple contract that gave them the rights to reproduce the image as they saw fit. And it was an open-ended contract, so that if they ever choose to sell their business, the buyer would then have to come back to me and renegotiate the terms of that. But as long as they continue to own and operate their business, they had purchased the rights to utilize this image as part of their marketing. And that's worked out really well for me in a couple of instances. The other thing that's really important is to understand what your painting process is, be able to speak to that or articulate that with your collector, and set very specific boundaries as to when you are accepting feedback or criticism, and you're going to make changes relative to what your collector is saying. So for instance, a really basic approach would be to hammer down a concept and do a sketch or a thumbnail, or maybe even a small study ahead of time. Get the client to approve that in writing. Everything happens in writing. Get the client to approve that, and then you do the painting. And perhaps you share the painting in process with them. If you're not comfortable doing that, you don't have to. You get to decide the parameters of this. Then share a finished version of the piece and ask for their okay. The finished version, when I share a finished version of a painting, that's not the time for somebody to come to me and say, oh, you know what? I actually want the full body and not the head and shoulders portrait. Or I want my background color to be different. Or can you actually change? Can you make the dog lying down instead of sitting up? That is not what happens at this stage. What happens at this stage for me is, if I've not gotten the likeness right, if the eyes aren't quite right, if the set of the ears aren't right, if maybe the markings are off a little bit, those are the kinds of shifts that I will make at that point. Any other changes have to be discussed way earlier before I even pick up a paintbrush. Now, that sort of latitude is going to be different for every artist, but you need to know what your circumstances are, and you need to be able to communicate that to them. So in the instance of the Kentucky Derby piece, I did a sketch, a contour drawing of my concept, and I swatched out some colors. But for me, because of the style that I was working in with that Derby piece, the magic happened in the spontaneity and the decision-making as I was painting live. And if I did a study ahead of time, all that decision-making would already happen and the painting would fall flat. So I found a workaround for Claire to take back to the board and show conceptually what they could expect to see at the end. So again, work with your collector, with your client, and come up with a compromise. In some instances, it maybe isn't going to be the exact same blueprint as all your other projects. One of the biggest questions I get asked all the time is, do you work with a contract? In the instance of the Kentucky Derby project, I did. There was a lot more at stake there. In the instance of smaller portraits, I rarely use a contract unless I feel that the client really, really wants it. But what I do is I have lots of conversations with my client. We look at images together. I share ideas. We pick specific paintings from my portfolio that represent what it is that they want. And then I write a report that restates what it is they want the painting to be, describe it, give a color palette for it, and any other specifics like the size, the substrate, that kind of thing. And I send that to them via email, and I ask them to acknowledge receipt and respond via email as well. So then I actually have it in writing what our agreement is, which to me is comfortable or is a sufficient enough contract. The reality of trying to enforce a legal contract when there could be multiple state lines involved, it's just, I don't want to deal with that. If a client is going to walk away from a project or be that problematic, I don't want their business anyway. So I'm not going to try to enforce a contract or enforce adherence to a contract. I'm just going to nullify the agreement and walk away in a professional manner. But I've really only had to do that. I've probably done over 2,000 commissions inside the last 20 years. And I've only walked away from 2 projects, and one was mutual because they just could not find the photos. The other one, we ended up shifting from downsizing the scope of the project because they found that it was really difficult to deliver the photos that I needed, and I found that they were very difficult to work with. So it was in both cases, it was sort of a mutual thing. But I do want to say that once you have that project hammered out, don't accept any money until the client delivers what you need in order to start the project. So it makes no sense to take a deposit. I mean, it does make sense to take a deposit and then wait for reference photos. But in some instances, those reference photos may not show up for 10 months to 12 months. And maybe by that point, you're no longer doing commission work, or you're not even excited about the project to begin with. So tell your collector you want the materials they need to supply you with and the deposit to arrive at the same time. That way you're not holding or hanging on to somebody's money and waiting, or in hold, waiting for until you can even begin a project, but still indebted to them because you have a lump sum of their money. Also, if they deliver you crappy reference photos, if the project is reliant on reference photos, crappy reference photos are a no-go. Crappy reference photos mean a less than beautiful painting. It means you are investing way more work in the project than your base quote allotted for. And don't you want to deliver your absolute best work every single time? So why hobble yourself from the very get-go? Crappy photos, you can apologize. You can say, I'm sorry. I really, a line that I felt always worked was, I don't feel that I can do these photos justice. I don't feel that I can actually picture your pet moving around in the studio with me. And that's what I need to do. I can't see the animal's eyes. And that is the key component, the most important component of a portrait. Without photos of the animal's eyes, I really can't. I would be faking it, and that's not fair to you. I'm certain you can find a polite way to let them know that that you're not comfortable taking the project on because of the caliber of the photos. So I think I kind of spun through all of this. Oh, and I do want to speak also about reference photos. When I was doing the Kentucky Derby project, having never been to Churchill Downs myself, and the track was actually closed at the time that we began talking about the project, I let Claire know that I needed reference photos from that space, and I needed them from a very specific perspective, under certain lighting and all of that. And I needed whoever the photographer was to give me a release for those photos. And Claire was able to navigate that. She hired somebody and got them on the grounds of the track, because I was in Michigan, the track's in Kentucky. She hired somebody locally to walk the track, take the shots that I wanted, and release the rights to me to use them for my artwork. So again, an instance where you can ask for what you need, and you can ask the collector to be responsible for delivering that in your absence, or if you're unable to go out and do or perform that particular task. So I want to open the floor up to any questions that you might have. Feel free to unmute yourselves and ask away. Go ahead. Betsy, is that your hand up?
It is. Hi.
Hi.
This has been great. I'm really enjoying you talking about the business side of being an artist. I have sold many of my things, but I shy away from commissions because really it kind of stresses me out to try to recreate what they have in their mind. Did you have a sense of that when you first started doing commissions, or do you have so much confidence it doesn't bother you?
Well, my recollection is that at the time I was both elated and excited at the prospect of selling a painting, and also so happy to be painting, period, that I don't know that I let fear creep in that much. I also tend to be a rabid optimist just in general in life. So that probably has a lot to do with my capacity to dive into a project and not at the onset of it, not go to, a worst case scenario. As I got more experience under my belt, there were times when, I would just feel like I was struggling. And there were some projects that I bit off that I think I probably shouldn't have. But what I began to recognize was that if I ever felt resistance or didn't want to start a project, there was an underlying reason for that. And that underlying reason might have been because the photos were really crappy, or it could be because my collector maybe wasn't, I wasn't like feeling it with them. Maybe I felt like they were bossy, or they were asking for something that was unrealistic. And yet somehow I still said yes. I learned something with every project. But those projects where I did feel resistance were the ones where I really had to step back and say, what did I do here to change my usual state of mind into this? Like what is happening here? And maybe it's not what did I do, but what did I allow to happen? What did I let in the door that is impacting my normal way or normal mindset in approaching a piece? But they can be really intimidating. And I think it's a matter of believing in yourself and also setting boundaries so that you have control over the things that impact the quality of the product that you deliver.
Okay.
If you get great reference photos, if you know that you are clearly communicating to the client so they're not surprised by what they get at the end, and if you know that you're comfortable with the subject matter, like I would never take on a child's, I can think of, I've maybe done 2 children portraits, but not as commissions. One is a gift. Actually, they both were gifts. So, but I would never take money for a child's portrait because I don't feel comfortable painting those. But if I did ultimately, maybe I'll wake up next week and say, oh, I would love to go into children's portraiture. Then I need to get some training and some technique under my belt before I'm comfortable taking money too.
Okay. Yeah.
A long rambling answer to your question.
Thank you.
You're welcome. What other questions might be out there in the universe today? Feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand.
I have another. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, and this isn't from, I haven't done a lot of commission work, but my husband did quite a bit of it for commission jewelry. So what do you do when the project is done, you followed what the customer wanted, but it's the type of customer that is never really knows what they want? And so in the end, we had 2 different situations where it was all paid for, it was all delivered, but they came back a couple weeks later saying, no, they didn't like it at all. So,
well, yeah.
Do you is there a refund situation, or in the one case, we just did it over and it was just a new job. Because it
And
was a
that-
gold casting and stone setting, it was a huge deal. But what do you know,
And that's what I have done. Now, I've never delivered a product and had it come back, but I have sent like a final JPEG or an in-process image and then had the customer come back and say, you know what, I don't like this after all. And in those instances, I have to remind myself that I'm painting for what they want, not for what I think they need. And if they're telling me they don't want it, I need to regroup it. Now, if I've already invested a big amount of time, like in the one instance that I'm talking about, I had already purchased panels. There were multiple portraits involved in the project, and the panels that I'd already purchased were no longer suitable for that project, and they were custom. And a significant amount of time had also transpired between I accepted the deposit well before the client was ready to go. A year had lapsed before we began looking at photos. Another 6 to 8 months happened before there were enough photos to do the project. And now we're 2 years, almost 2 years into the project, and they no longer what they originally contracted for. So I said, you know what, let's go back to the drafting table. The money I've taken right now, we'll apply that as a deposit towards new work. But in that instance, I had a price increase, and I said, I can't quote you at my price from 2 years ago. We're going to go with this new price. I can't control the fact, you know, that you took so long to get the project rolling. So there was a little bit of give and take in that. But ultimately, you know, I also have had clients who come back and say, I didn't tell you this at the beginning, but I absolutely hate orange, and you put the background in the portrait orange. And is there any way that we can rework it? They're, you know, if they're going to be kind about it, of course I'm going to do that for them, because that's the kind of customer service I deliver. And I think it's something that you would figure out on a job by job basis. If your client is being kind and they genuinely realized that that's not really what they wanted, you do your best to try and deliver. Now, in your husband's case, he had to completely recreate the piece. And
which involved
that,
casting. It was a huge expense. So he
Yeah.
couldn't refund the whole job.
and I feel like that is a risk that we take on as commissioned or as artists for hire. It's not something that we can actually control. But the better we get at knowing our customers, and we're always going to get customers who come to us who can't communicate, who can't commit to an idea, who think they want something, but then they see something else and that sound, you know, like the shiny object, that sounds way better. There's always going to be people like that. And the clearest, most succinct conversation at the onset isn't going to alleviate the fact that that's their nature. And furthermore, having a contract in place, which I'm sure your husband did have when he's creating a custom piece of jewelry, it isn't going to matter to them either. So I guess figuring out how far you're going to go to make the customer happy versus how far do you need to go to enforce your own personal boundaries and not feel like you're taken advantage of. Find a spot between those.
Yeah.
I'm sorry he experienced that. That had to be really frustrating.
Yeah, and the one situation is actually a family member.
And that makes it even harder. Family members are such hard. You know, and this is just me, but I would much rather sell a piece. And I'm sorry if any family members actually watch this video. I would much rather sell a piece to a collector, a friend, than a family member, just because there's just so many other things that can come up if they decide they don't want the piece anymore, or yeah, it's just a convoluted. It
And I
can
think
be a
it's a
Pandora's box.
percentage of people have absolutely no idea what they want.
And
You know,
so it's our job to have that conversation at the get-go and to know what sort of questions to ask, to maybe have a script even that we follow that, you know, that says, do you want this? Do you want, yeah. And I've had collectors who have, nitpicked tiny little details in a painting and said, you know, they didn't like that. They didn't like that. And to me, it was a really important aspect of the painting, like how a tag on a dog's collar, depending on its angle, it's going to reflect the light differently. Well, if you have multiple faces, multiple dog collars, multiple tags in a painting, they're all hanging at different angles and catching the light differently, and they're all going to be different colors. But my collector wanted them all exactly identical. That felt to me like it was a glaring problem that undid all of the modeling of form and the natural light that I'd created in the portrait. But it was important to them. It was really important to them. And I tried to argue it, and they could not see my point of view, or not argue. I tried to share my point of view and speak to how important that was to the overall aesthetic of the piece. And they were not willing to budge. So I had to paint it that way for them. But those pieces never ended up on my portfolio because I wasn't proud of them. Yeah. What other questions, Judy?
Hi, I do have a question, and that is a point about if you are asked by a potential client to paint something that looks like something else that someone else painted, and of course, you know, you're true to yourself. You're going to paint yourself. You're not going to violate any rights by copying something else. But what's a conversation you might have with a client like that?
Oh, that's a good question. So I've not been asked this myself, so I'm kind of really flying off the seat of my pants. But I would maybe start with a gentle introduction to the idea of copyright and stylistic tendencies, and say, hey, let's say that they asked me to paint in the style of I can't even think of let's say Kate Dardine. Okay, she's a contemporary artist and I love her work. So if somebody came to me and said, I want you to paint my dog's portrait in the style of Kate Dardine, well, I think my first question for them would be kind of like a sarcastic, why aren't you going to Kate to ask for this kind of thing? And then, Kate's style is very unique to her, and I'm not comfortable copying another artist's style. I have my own style, and I really enjoy working in that. This is what I can do. This is how my style might be similar to Kate's, but it's also very different. So you could choose to go this route with me, or I would be happy to give you Kate's contact info and you could speak to her. Something along that kind of way. But I think a lot of people in the public don't understand the idea of copyright at all, but they also don't understand how artists work to create their own unique voice. Like you wouldn't necessarily ask a country singer to rap, but that's kind of what these people are asking us to do, to come and paint something for them in the style of somebody else. That's not our wheelhouse. So gently educating them about how it is that we work, or the things that we really value about the style that we work in, and speaking about that in a passionate way, I think is the best way to help them. Reality wise, they may not like the answer and they may go to the next artist in line, say, can you do this painting for me? But then it's not our problem anymore. We haven't compromised our morals in any sense. That's a great question.
Thank you. Great answer.
Betsy, did you have a follow-up question?
I have a separate question. I was considering entering a contest to create a poster for an art festival that's happening in my area. Do you think your suggestions that you've made today would apply towards that, or is that a different situation?
Well, without knowing much about the parameters of the event that you're participating in, typically events like that have what they call a prospectus or a call for entry. Right. Have you seen something related to that for this event? So that is going to have all of the requirements for eligibility, restrictions or requirements for the artwork, they're basically going to define what it is they want the work to look and feel like. And then it's also going to outline how they plan to use the work. So in some instances, the call for entry may say it may be for a physical show that's going to hang in a space. And they'll talk about the dates the show is going to hang, if there's any monetary prizes that are awarded, and if so, how they're going to be determined. It may even talk about whose responsibility the insurance is for the artwork while it's on display, whether the space is going to insure the work or it's up to the individual. They may also talk about whether or not they're going to accept hand-delivered work only, or if you have to ship it, and how are they going to return the work. All of that information is going to be outlined there. And in a call for entry where they're going to reuse that artwork for something, it will also include or outline exactly how they plan to use that artwork. So I did the poster for the American Kennel Club's National Dog Championship show in 2007. And I got a whole contract that outlined exactly how they were going to use that. It told me how many posters they were printing, where they were going to reproduce that image, how it was going to be reproduced, what I was going to get in return for the usage of this. All of those specifics were outlined, even the turning over of the original to them. So take a look at all that fine print. It's there for a reason. It's there to help guide you to decide whether or not it's something you really want to participate in. Right. There are a lot of not shows, but a lot of events right now where if you don't read the fine print, some of these event hosts, even if you don't win, they want the copyright to reuse your work to potentially promote their product. So, I think people have gotten savvier now, creatives have, and demanded that clause get removed. But if you're not careful, I know we have a couple events here in the Michigan area where their contract upon entry states that you relinquish your copyright to your artwork. You relinquish the right for reproducing it. You relinquish the right to exhibit it inside a certain mile radius. Well, that's not something that I can commit to. Maybe I already have a licensing arrangement on that image with another vendor, or maybe that painting is committed or currently hanging in a gallery downtown, and I want to enter the image in, let's say a billboard contest. So really, really make sure that whatever is there in that call for entry or prospectus, you're comfortable with before you actually enter the event.
Okay. Good advice. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Well, I have a quick little video that I thought I would share with you, just to sort of go back to my original comment or starting comment about having a body of work that represents what it is that you bring to the table with regards to a commission project. And this is a little 2-minute, it's 1-minute video that Claire built based on the things that she loved in my artwork that she wanted, or that represented or matched the look and feel of the 2015 Kentucky Derby. She created this little ad, and then when she went to the board to pitch me as the official artist, this was what she showed them. So they never actually got to see at this point, or when they hired me, they hadn't yet seen any sort of preparatory work for the artwork. This was how they got to know who I was as an artist. Here you go. So you can see from that little video that there were commonalities between all those images. First of all, they represented the subject matter that the ultimate, that the customer that Churchill Downs actually wanted to depict. So that body of work demonstrated my ability to paint a complex shape and form inside the context of the sport itself. It also demonstrated my knowledge of the sport itself, as well as speaking to the visual elements that they were looking for, like the excitement, the energy, the color, the pageantry of horse racing. So knowing who or the sort of commission work you want to create and cultivating a collection of pieces that represent that, and then creating a space for that to sit and be discovered by your collector base is really the key component to getting started on successful stream of income for commission work. All right. I want to thank everybody for spending their lunch hour with me today on this episode of Watching Paint Dry. I really value your time and choosing to sit with me for a little bit and talk about this. And I want to thank everybody who brought great questions to the conversation today as well. And I will see you all at the next session. Meanwhile, I hope everyone has a safe race on Derby Day, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.